This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, so Yossi said if we're going to talk about Pesach Sheini, we have to bring in a munkatcher, right? Remember? Yeah, so we have to bring in something from the Shar Yisaschar. So I want to share with you something very interesting. We know that on Pesach, I have one of my Haggadahs over here. So by Koirech, we say, Zecher l'mikdash ki Hillel. Kain also Hillel, b'zman shebeis hamikdash hayakayim. This is what Hillel did when the Beis Hamikdash stood. Haya koirech matzah umarar v'oichel b'yachad. He would tie together matzah and marar, and he would eat it together. L'kayim mashenemar al matzah sumroim yachluhu. Okay, everybody says it, but the question is, and this is mamish hafel of a fella, we're quoting the wrong pasuk. Al matzah sumroim yachluhu is parak tes pasuk yud aleph parshas v'haloischa by the parsha of Pesach Sheini. By Pesach Sheini, it says, Al matzos umroyim yechuhu. By Pesach Rishon, it doesn't say, Al matzos umroyim yechuhu. What does it say by Pesach Rishon? V'achlu oisav layla zet, Sli eish umatzos, kama, Al meroyim yechuhu. Doesn't say, Al matzos umroyim yechuhu. It says, Sli eish umatzos, Al meroyim yechuhu. So why would Hillel, when the Beis Hamikdash stood, on Pesach proper, he would tie together matzah and marar and say the pasuk that's not relevant to Pesach Rishon. He would say the pasuk by Pesach Sheini, and because of this, many achronim say where there's a ta'as sofer in the Haggadah, you need to say l'kai mashanemar tzli eish umatzois al meroyim yechlu, because it's the wrong pasuk. So there's a big discussion about this. This is the question of the Belzer Rebbe, the Sar Shalma Belz. Yeah. And his son, Rabbi Shulami Bel, says that the Kavanah of the Haggadah is not a statement, but rather it's a bakasha. Because B'Avnei Seinu Arabim, here we are, it's Yodaled Nisan, it's Tesvav Nisan, and Madu Aloi Ba Ben Yishai, Gam Tamoil, Gam Hayoim, David Melch still hasn't come, he hasn't shown up yet. So we hoped that when Pesach would come, we would be Zoicha to be Makar of the Karm Pesach, but we're not Zoicha to be Mekayim the Karm Pesach. So therefore we say Koirech with the pasuk of Pesach Sheini as a bakasha, that we hope that in between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheini, Mashiach will come, and we should taka be Zoicha to be Makar, not Pesach Rishon, but Pesach Sheini. That's the Belzer Rebbe's teretz. Okay, you got it? So he learns the Haggadah is Dafka, the Gersa is Dafka. We specifically need to quote the pasuk of, it's a tefillah, it's a bakasha. Okay, l'kayim hashenemer al matzois umroyim l'chiyu. L'kayim hashenemer. We hope that by the time Pesach Sheini comes, we should be zoicha to eat the Pesach Sheini. Okay, got it? So the story goes like this. It came to the Shalom Meshav, Rabbi Yosef Shal Halevi Natanzan, great Shalom Meshav, the Pesach Hadar. And he sort of was matmiya on the Belzer Rebbe. He was matmiya on the Belzer Rebbe that it can't be. It can't be, this is a tefillah, it has to be a mistake over here. There's no way that this is a tefillah. Why is there no way this is a tefillah? Because the Gemara says like this. The Gemara Psachim, the Gemara says that, let's say a guy is tameh, then he brings the Karm Pesach, Pesach Sheini. Let's say 10 people are tameh, they go to Pesach Sheini. What if the majority of Klal Yisrael is Tameh? So the halacha is very good. Tumah hutra b'tzibur. They're not nidche to Pesach Sheini. Yochid nidche ve'in tzibur nidche. So says the Reb Shal Levi Natanzan, it's not true. How could you say it's about kasha? All of Klal Yisrael are Tameh. If all of Klal Yisrael are Tameh, so then we're not going to bring a Pesach Sheini because the tzibur is not hutra to Pesach Sheini. The tzibur would be makriv on Pesach Rishon. That was the kasha of the Shalom Meshav. However, the story goes that Rabbi Yosef Naftali Stern, grandson of Chassam Sofer, also had this kasha, and he came before Rabbi Aaron of Belz. And Rabbi Aaron of Belz says, no, you're making a mistake. Why? The halacha that a tzibur is not nidcha to Pesach Sheini is only if the tzibur is tameh. But there's Yushalmi. The Yushalmi discusses what would happen if Beis Hamikdash is built between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheini. The The Yishalmi brings the machlokes, but there is an opinion that even though Tum Hotra B'tzibor and only a Yachid is Nidchet to Pesach Sheini, but if the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheini, then Taka, we would be makriv of the Karam Pesach on Pesach Sheini. So this reinstates the Chiddush of the Belzer Rebbe, the Sar Shalom of Belz, who Rabbi Shua of Belz, that the Kavana, the Baal Haggadah, it's a Lashon Bakash and it's a Lashon Tefillah, that we should be Zoicha, the Beis HaMikdash should be built, and we'll bring the Karam Pesach in Yerushalayim. So this is a famous sort of vikuach, a famous conversation, story. You have Rabbi Shua of Belz, who said it's a bakasha, that we hope the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt, and we makro the Karam Pesach in Yerushalayim. The kasha of the Rebbe Shal Halevi Natanzan, that ain't Sibor Nidchis, only a Yachid is Nidchis. And then the answer based on this, Yushalmi. So the truth is, let's try to understand 2 points over here. Number one, why does the Torah write a different lashon by Pesach Rishon by Pesach Sheini? By Pesach Rishon it says Tzli Eish U'Matzois Al Meroyim Yechluhu, and by Pesach Sheini it says Al Matzois U'Meroyim Yechluhu. What's the pshat in that? So I saw last night from the Shari Saschar of the Munkatcher, he says a very simple reason why by Pesach Rishon it says Tzli Eish U'Matzois Al Meroyim Yechluhu, and by Pesach Sheini it says Al Matzois U'Meroyim Yechluhu. It's a very pashut reason. It's a halacha. We know by Pesach Rishon, let's say a person has no carbon Pesach, you still have to eat matzah. There's an independent mitzvah to eat matzah. What's the mitzvah? Ba'erev teichlu matzahs. So the mitzvah to eat a kazayis of matzah. There's another mitzvah to eat matzah with the carbon Pesach. Matzahs amroim yechluhu. There are two mitzvahs. There's one to eat matzah and one to eat matzah more with the carbon Pesach. Bisman hazeh, Rabbi say, is matzah d'oraisa or is matzah d'rabbanan? It's d'oraisa. What do you mean? Well, we don't have a carbon Pesach. It's not dependent on the carbon Pesach. There's an independent mitzvah of matzah. Ba'erev teichlu matzahs. What about marar? Bisman hazeh, is marar d'oraisa or marar d'rabbanan? Marar is d'rabbanan, because marar is dependent on the Karam Pesach. We don't have a Karam Pesach, so we don't have marar d'oraisa. So now the question is, Pesach Sheini. Is there a mitzvah to eat matzah? No mitzvah to eat matzah. The mitzvah is to eat matzah with the Karam Pesach. If you don't have a Karam Pesach, you don't eat matzah. So that's pshat in the Lashon HaTorah. Tzli Eish U'Matzois. Matzah is separate. Matzah is the equivalent of Karam Pesach. So we say Tzli Eish U'Matzois. The matzah is separate. Al meroyrim yachlu. You eat the matzah on the marar, but the matzah has an independent status, the same way the Karam Pesach has a mitzvah d'oraisa. Tzli Eish U'Matzois. Al meroyrim yachlu. By Pesach Sheini, there's no mitzvah to eat matzah. So Pesach Sheini, it says Al Matzois U'Meroyrim yachlu. Eat the Karam Pesach with matzah and marar. So that's how the Munkatcher explains the nuance of difference between the lashon by Pesach Rishon, by Pesach Sheini. By Pesach Rishon, matzah is a d'oraisa like Karam Pesach, so it equates matzah to Karam Pesach. It says U'Matzois Al Meroyim Yechluhu. By Pesach Sheini, there's no independent mitzvah matzah, so it says Al Matzois Meroyim Yechluhu. Fine. But it's interesting. The Munkatcher brings down this whole Torah. He says it on his own. He says we say in the Haggadah Al Matzois Meroyim Yechluhu. And the question is, why are we quoting the wrong pasuk? And he says, some want to say, he says, V'rabim shamati sharatzu l'shabesh hanuscha. Many want to change the gersa. Ulagia, the pasuk, U'Matzois amroim yechlu. But you can't say every Haggadah in the world is a mistake. There are like 1 million Haggadahs out there. You can't say they're all wrong. So he says very pashut, that the truth is, B'nisan negalu, B'nisan asidin ligal. But once Leil Pesach comes, and the Goyal Tzedek hasn't come, by Erev Pesach, so we know he's not coming yet. So what are we going to do about the Karam Pesach? So we know from the Yushalmi, that if Mashiach comes when Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheini, the whole tzibur will be pushed off to Pesach Sheini, so it's a tefillah, he says this whole pshat. So the question is, in Svara, why should it make a difference? Why, if the tzibur of Klal Yisrael are tamei, they are not pushed off to Pesach Sheini because ein tzibur nidchim, and if the Beis HaMikdash is built between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheini, then they do bring Pesach Sheini. Why should it matter whether the whole tzibur is tamei and then they don't get pushed off, or if we don't have a Beis HaMikdash and then they do get pushed off? What would the svara be?
What Tamil has to receive it better than ideal?
Because l'chayr it's Gzeres HaKasav. The Gemara darshans a pasuk, ein tzibur nidches. So ein tzibur nidches. So then, either way, whether they're tamei or whether there's no Beis HaMikdash, why should it matter? So I happened to see last night. There is an opinion.
People will not be tamei anymore, right? You go to. I mean, it's also like.
They won't be tamei. Yeah, but we don't push off. The tzibur doesn't get to bring Pesach Sheini, whether they're tamei or whether there's no Beis HaMikdash. So I happen to see the Minchas Chinuch is not discussing this girsa in the Haggadah, but he happens to discuss some of these halachos, and mitoch dvarav you'll see why it makes a difference whether we say ein sibor nidches, 3 sheets, or we say ein sibor nidches, but when there's no Beis HaMikdash, it is nidches. So we're going to start with ois yod aleph on page ayin aleph. You have page ayin aleph?
We don't see the pages, so we just...
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Yud Aleph. V'hinei hanidchim lePesach Sheini hem davka miyad hakahal. When you're pushed off to Pesach Sheini, it's only the minority of the tzibur. Aval mechza, but if it's half and half, let's say there are 100 Jews, let's say there are 1,000 Jews, and 500 are tamei. Umikol shekein roi vakol, and certainly the majority. Ein oisin Pesach Sheini. We don't make Pesach Sheini v'zug zer sakasov. Okay, Yachid Nidches, Ve'ein Tzibur Nidches. Fine. So here's the Shaila. V'neim ha'yuroiv ha'kal tamei meis barishain. If the majority of Klal Yisrael were tamei by Pesach Rishon, ha'kal oisim Pesach Rishon. Everyone does Pesach Rishon. Af ha'tahirim. Even, now, like this. The majority of Klal Yisrael are tamei. Everyone does Pesach Rishon. But what it's not fair, because those who are tahar are now going to become tamei because they're joining together with the tameim to be makar the Pesach Rishon. He says, so what? The tahirim will join the tameim to be makar the Karban Pesach Rishon. Af ha tahirim yasu b'tumah shenemar v'hi anoshim tameim lenefesh adam. And the drush is like this: anoshim yichidim nidchim ve'ein sibor nidchim rak oisim b'tumah ki tumah dechuya b'tzibor. Tumah is pushed off b'tzibor. V'harambam kasav. The davar zehu b'tumas meis bovad. This whole din that tumah is pushed off, is tumah's dechuya, is only b'tzibur, is only tamei meis. What if the majority of Klal Yisrael try to catch the squirrel in the roof? Okay, so then now they're tamei squirrel. So do we say they could be makar of the Karban Pesach? No.
We're saying dechuya, right?
Dechuya. Yeah, it's that means like this. Tumah, yeah. That's the lashon of the Gemara. It happens to be we paskin hutra. It's not relevant whether dechuya or hutra. Either way, but you're right. The lashon is dechuya. So the Rambam says davar zeh b'tumas meis bovad nira the b'chol hatumais by all tumais afilu naga b'sharetz v'navela ein nidches hatuma. We can't push away the tuma. V'chein kasav perik dad mibias mikdash halach yud beis lahedya the davka tumas meis nidches b'tzibor v'loy tumas sharetz.
What was the kasha by Chanukah?
They weren't Tumah, it was Tumah Meis by Chanukah. The Tumah by Chanukah was Tumah's Meis. Because they were involved in the war and they touched dead bodies. That's why Tosfos asks, what do you mean? Goyim are Matame as like a Zav. So if the Goyim are Matame as Zav, so then the Shemin is Tameh. And we don't say Hutra B'tzibur on Tumah Zav. So Tosfos has to say maybe it was before the Gzeira that Goyim are Matame by Zav. But only Tumas Meis is Hutra B'tzibur, or Hudcha B'tzibur. Okay, the Kan, right? Hadya the Davka Tumas Meis Nidchas B'tzibur V'loy Tumas Sharetz. The Kan, Halacha Ches L'inyan Achila Mavur B'dvar the Nidchas Atama L'chol Tamei Magar. Rak betuma hayotz me'aguf kagoin zavin loy nidchas. Okay, so the Rambam sort of is mashma that there are other tumais which are pushed off. Now go to the next paragraph. Hayu mechza tahirin umechza tamei meis. What if it's half and half? Because we said that tzibur is not hudcha. In other words, the tzibur tuma hudcha but tzibur, and they're going to be makrivid betuma on Pesach Rishon, and the tahirim are going to be makriv with them. What about half and half? Then we say like this: even though half of Klal Yisrael that are tamei, they're going to be makriv the Karban by Pesach Rishon, but we're not going to make the half that are tahar become tameh to the half. In other words, we'll only make a miyad of Klal Yisrael who are tahar become tameh to the roiv, but we're not going to make half become tameh. So what do we say? They have two separate chaburas. Halalu oisin la'atzon b'tahara, halalu oisin la'atzon b'tumah. These do it themselves b'tahara, and these do it themselves b'tumah. V'im hayu hatmeim oidfim al hatahirim afilu echad. And if the tmeim were even one more than the tahirim oisim kulam b'tumah, then everyone does it b'tumah. The af yachid machriya, even one could outweigh them. V'im hayu hatahirim oidfim echad. What if you have one more tahar guy than tameh? Then the tmeim, what happens to them? Then they're not the roiv, then they're not the tzibur, and then they get pushed off. Hatmeim oisim b'sheni kedin miyat. Here's the $1 million. What about the ladies? So listen to this. Hayu anoshim Pesach Rishon mechza tahirim umechza tmeim. So you have 50-50. So what do you do by 50-50? So the 50 who are, we say tumah hudcha b'tzibur, and the people are going to be makriv b'tumah by Pesach Rishon. But if you now count the women, you're going to have roiv tahirim. So now, what are we going to do? Then we're going to have the miyot guys. Do we count the ladies to make the miyot, to make those who are tameh the miyot, to push them off? Hatahirim oisin es harishain. Those who are tahar do Pesach Rishon. V'hatameim ein oisin es harishain. Why? Because they're the miyot. Davlu miyot. Kivan denashim. Now there's a very interesting thing. Do women have to be makriv korban Pesach? Yes. They have to eat the korban Pesach. They have to be makriv it, or someone has to be makriv it for them. Let's say they didn't. Do they have to bring Pesach Sheini? No, it's rishus. So women have a unique halacha. Pesach Rishon for women is chayva. Pesach Sheini for women is rishus. So he says like this: if you have 50-50, let's say 100 men tameh, 100 men tahar, and all the women are tahar, so the women could be used in the calculation for Pesach Rishon, because for Pesach Rishon, women are chayva. So they created that the men who are tameh are a miyot. Now the men who are tameh are going to get pushed off. Umiyot ein oisin as harishon b'tumah. So now the question is, does this miyot are they makriv Pesach Sheini? They're not makriv Pesach Sheini either. Why not? Because they're not allowed to. Why? Because legabe Pesach Sheini, they're a tzibur. What do you mean? But the women, we don't count women for Pesach Sheini. We'll count the women for Pesach Rishon to make it that it's roiv tahirim, and the miyot who are tameim cannot be makriv Pesach Rishon. But we won't count the women for Pesach Sheini to allow them to be makriv Pesach Sheini, because the Gabe Pesach Sheini, they're not a tzibur. They're only 50-50.
Why are we only counting the nashim that are tahar? You're saying...
No, the women are all tahar. That's the scenario. The women are all tahar. So Legabe Pesach Rishon, we're going to count the women. If we count the women, those who are tameh are a miyot. If they're a miyot, they can't be makriv Pesach Rishon. So these tameim can't be makriv Pesach. So they're getting ready, they're getting prepared to be makriv korban Pesach Sheini. Comes Pesach Sheini, we say you can't be makriv. Why can't you be makriv? Because they're not roiv. Why are they not roiv? We say they can't be makriv Pesach Sheini because they're a roiv. How are they a roiv? They're 50-50. They're a miyot, because if you count the ladies, they're a miyot. No, we don't count the ladies for Pesach Sheini. The ladies only count for Pesach Rishon, because legabe Pesach Rishon, women are a chayva, and legabe Pesach Sheini, women are rishus. You hear the cheshbon of Minchas? He says, one more time, first wide line, Dahavalahu miyot. These tameim are a miyad kivan denashim barisha chayva. Women by Pesach Rishon are a chayv. Umiyad ein oisin es harishon b'tumah. Miyad cannot be makriv Pesach Rishon b'tumah. Ve'ein oisin es hasheni gamkin. They also can't be makriv Pesach Sheini. Kivan denashim b'sheni rishus. Women by Pesach Sheini are rishus. Loi nimnu hanashim. We're not going to count them. V'havalu mechza. And now the men are 50. Umechza ein oisin es hasheni. A mechza cannot be makriv Pesach Sheini. They have to be roiv. They have to be less than roiv. They have to be less than 50.
And we said they chiv the rice from a pasuk, even though it's a mitzvah such as my grandma.
Why?
They're chayiv on the lavin. So
yeah.
Chayiv on the lavin, they're also chayiv.
Yeah. Okay. Next, I needed the other page. You have another page for me? Next page. Or you have a Minchas? You have an extra second page? Okay. Then we go to Ois Yud Gimel. You have Ois Yud Gimel on the next page? Ois Yud Gimel on the next page. So what's the Gzeras HaKasav? Only a miyut could make Pesach Sheini. So a miyut cannot be makriv, but a miyut is pushed off to Pesach Sheini. That's why, if the only reason what made them a miyut was the ladies, then they can't be makriv Pesach Sheini, because Lagabe Pesach Sheini we don't count ladies, and they're not a miyut. So if they're not a miyut, they can't be makriv Pesach Sheini. But they couldn't be makriv Pesach Rishon either, because they were tamei. And Lagabe Pesach Rishon, we're going to count the ladies. Now we have a new scenario. Ready? Kvar kasavnu ba'oisir aleph. The Gzeras HaKasav davka miyod oisim hasheni. Only minority can be makriv Pesach Sheni. Aval roiv v'chein mechza ein oisin. The majority of Klal Yisrael, or even half, cannot do Pesach Sheni. So listen to the following scenario. Im kain. Im miyot nidchu. Let's like this. There are 1,000 Jews. 900 are tahar. 100 were tamei. And these 100 got pushed off to Pesach Sheni. And ubein shnei psachim, and in the interim, nisgairu harbe gerim. Torah anytime became very popular, and there were a lot of gerim. I just got an email, not an email. I got a message from somebody at a shaila. Where you live? He lives in northeast India. He's from the Bnei Menashe, and he's coming to Eretz Yisrael. He's going to make Aliyah, but they already have the status in 2005. Rabbi Shlomo Amar Paskin, the Bnei Menashe are considered Jews. They only need Gerus L'chumra. So it could happen. Between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, there were many, many Gerim. Oy nizgadlu harbe ktanim, or there were a lot of 12-year-olds. And they all became Bar Mitzvah between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. And now, what we thought was only a miyut who need to bring Pesach Sheni, now it's the majority of Klal Yisrael. You got 10,000 Gerim. And now the majority of Klal Yisrael has to bring Pesach Sheni. They amount to Rav Tzira Mechza. Now we know the majority cannot bring Pesach Sheni. So here these guys innocently thought by Pesach Rishon they're going to bring by Pesach Sheni. But 10 days later you added 10,000 Gerim. And now, did they lose their ability to be Makriv for Pesach Sheni? Yeah, the Shaila. In other words, they were by Pesach Rishon, they were a miyot. Comes Pesach Sheni, they're already arrived. So L'chayra says Minchas Chinuch, L'chayra ein oisin hasheni. They shouldn't make the Sheni. Kivan de Mechza. The truth is, the majority of Klal Yisrael can't do Pesach Sheini. And now,
those people didn't have Choiva or the Pesach Rishon. It's a different situation.
Pesach Sheini is a makeup. So if they were mechoyev to begin with, why should
but here's the thing: if there were, let's say, minority of Gerim, let's say you had 10 Gerim who were Megayer between Rishon and Sheni, they will be Makra Pesach Sheini, right?
No, but the whole point of the Pesach Sheini is
a makeup
for the Rishon. If you were mechoyev in the Rishon to begin with, why should you be allowed to be makar?
But the halacha is that a ger who's niskayr between Rishon and Sheni can. So if he can, l'chor we should use him to count, right. And then they should be mavatel. These poor guys, these guys who thought they could bring Pesach Sheni. In other words, if they need to bring it, why are they not mitzaref to the cheshbon?
Same thing comes up if there's bar mitzvah in between Pesach. They still make a, since even though they were potter at the time, it's still a chiyuv. It still carries on.
Okay. So pashtus is now that the majority of Klal Yisrael needs to bring Pesach Sheni, they should not be able to. But halacha is the guys who by Pesach Rishon were eligible are still eligible. Why? Because the count does not go by now, the count goes by Pesach Rishon. And if by Pesach Rishon they were a miyut, even though now, 10 days later, if by Pesach Rishon they're a miyut, if by Pesach Sheni they're the roiv, they don't lose their opportunity to be makar Pesach Sheni.
By Nashim?
What? No, because by Nashim we counted them by Pesach Rishon. Oh, so why do we count them again?
Right, meaning the same thing.
No, by Noshim different law, right?
You mean why, if we counted the women to be mechayev, to say that the women were chayev. Right. So since the women were chayev, it's roiv tahirim, right. And they're tamei, and we said you could bring it. Right. But then we said you can't bring Pesach Sheni.
We count the women by Pesach Sheni.
Oh, okay, good. Kashi was asking, how come by the women we're counting them by Pesach Sheni?
we don't count them Pesach Sheini. They're not high of Pesach Sheini.
The answer is, we counted them Pesach Rishon, what they're going to be by Pesach Sheini. So the count goes by Pesach Rishon. But the count goes right now for Pesach Rishon, what? You're a miyot. And therefore you can't be makriv. But right now for Pesach Sheini, you're not a miyot, so you can't do Pesach Sheini now. Meaning the numbers don't change. But the count is now, but we could project now, but we can't change the count later on. Yeah, it's a good kasha. It's a good kasha.
You're basically saying that it goes by count, not by the groups. Even though we know that women will not be high Pesach Sheni, we still include them for Pesach
correct,
Rishon, and
correct.
vice versa. Like people who became bar mitzvah
no, because
Gerim, they are nobody for Pesach Rishon, but we count them by Pesach Sheni.
So it's not.
It's like
No, we don't count Ketanim for Pesach Sheni. Oh, right? Because
they became bar mitzvah.
but they weren't here. If they weren't bar mitzvah, they weren't here. The women are here. The women are here. Women are standing here. Right now they're chayiv, but for Pesach Sheni they're pater. So we could count them now for now and for later. But a katan, he's not eligible now, so he's not oila b'cheshbon. Even though you'll say count now. Right now, I know there's going to be a katan by Pesach Sheni. So if he's going to be a katan, he's going to be chayiv. So right now we should say he's pater. Project. So it's the pshat is that we're not projecting.
It's not, because Pesach Sheini is a din in Pesach Rishon.
Right. We're not projecting. We're not going to look in future numbers. We're looking in numbers right now. But right now, women are not chayiv in Pesach Sheni. So I want to get to one point here. Okay. So you said. One second. I gotta go.
There is Magiefa and people die.
Well,
Because I will change numbers and we will count them back and forth.
right, l'chayra, it would be the same. So he says like this. So Pashtus is that if you're going to have people who become bar mitzvah or gerim, they're going to make it that now this miyut becomes a roiv and they shouldn't be able to do Pesach Sheni. The davar zeh, the roiv umiyad. This concept of are they the majority or minority, ha'ikaru nechshav b'Pesach Rishon. It's counted by Pesach Rishon. Im hayu miyah b'Pesach Rishon. If they are the miyah by Pesach Rishon, v'nidchu take off the Pesach Sheni. They're immediately pushed off the Pesach Sheni. Av sha'achrei zeh, even if after this nisrabu harbe, many Jews will be added. Mikam makam oisim ha'sheni. Kivan shayu b'Pesach Rishon miyot. Since by Pesach Rishon is a miyot, ugzeres ha'kas of the miyot nidchem. And there's a biblical rule that the miyot of Kais will get pushed off. V'chein im hayu b'Pesach Rishon roiv. Okay, vice versa. This was Arileb. This is your case, okay? Third line in the wide lines. Let's say you have the majority of Klal Yisrael by Pesach Rishon. Let's say the majority or half of Klal Yisrael are Tamei by Pesach Rishon. Af shenismatu acher kach. And then they got diminished. Like this. You have 1,000 Jews and 600 were Tamei. So now what? So what do we say?
I want to bring Pesach Sheni, Pesach Rishon. We have Pesach Rishon, right?
So what's this case? V'cheinu hayu b'Pesach Rishon roiv what? Klal Yisrael?
The Einam Nidachem, they weren't pushed off.
They were tar, right? Roiv were Tamei.
Roiv were, I guess Roiv were Tahar.
Tar, the Einam.
They're not Nidcha.
Right.
Meaning the Tumah is not Nidcha. Right? So the Tumah, the Tumah is not Nidcha. If the Tumah is not Nidcha,
so they get pushed to Pesach Sheni.
they get pushed off, right? So you have Roiv of Klal Yisrael who are going to go to Pesach Sheni.
No, it's me. The Roiv is tar.
Roiv of Klal Yisrael is Tahar. So so you have a miyud who's going to be pushed off. You have a miyud of Klal Yisrael who's going to be pushed off.
Yes. Right.
So they're going to go to Pesach Sheni. Af shenismatu acher kach, and then they were diminished. These Tameim were diminished. How's that? Kugain shechelek mehem Tameim b'Pesach Sheni. Some of them were Tamei. What?
The Tahirim were diminished.
So the Tahirim are diminished. So now the majority of Klal Yisrael are Tamei. Okay, good. Oy be'eza oifen, or some other scenario. So you had let's say 30% who were Tamei, right? And then after between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, you have the majority of Klal Yisrael. But why would that change anything? Yeah, I don't understand the case. There's no chiyuv at all.
same concept that the Rebbe said before.
When is it not chal on them? That means by Pesach Sheini, it has to be by Pesach Rishon. The majority of Klal Yisrael were tamei. So there's probably a mistake over here. I mean, in other words, the majority were tamei, and then, okay, we get the point, right? Look in the end. Haklal the ikar tali b'chazon the Pesach Rishon. Im he miyot nidchu. If they're a majority, if they're a minority, they get pushed off. Even if by that time the Tmeim become a roiv, v'oisem Pesach Sheini. But if they're a roiv, then Pesach Sheini is not chal, even if they got diminished. Okay, fine. So that's the rule. The count goes by Pesach Rishon. The count does not go by the interim period. So now here's the upshot. Okay, it comes out very geshmak. Let's see if we could. Yeah. Okay, the last dice. According to what I wrote. Okay, the ikar misharina ba'osim shem kan, that we basically evaluated by those who are here, v'roid sim lasois haPesach, and wanna make the current Pesach, uva'osim she'enam kan, and those who are not here, loy misharinan klal, we don't evaluate at all. Meaning like this. Let's say you have 100 people who come to the Beis HaMikdash, and 10 of them are tamei, and 90 are tahar. So the 10 who are tamei are pushed off the Pesach Sheini. Let's say you have 100 people here, and 90 are tamei. The 90 who are tamei will not get pushed off, and they can be makar v'tumah, even though you have 10,000 Jews at home who don't want to be makar v'karm Pesach. Meaning, the Minchas Chinuch is saying now, the calculation of roiv and miyot is not based on Jews in the world, not based on Jews in Eretz Yisrael, Jews who want to be makar the Karm Pesach. If you have Jews who are sitting at home, they're not oila in the cheshbon. So if you have 100 Jews at the Harabayas, 90 of them are tamei, they're makar of the Karm Pesach. Either the minority of Klal Yisrael, no, the majority. There are only 100 Jews who want to be makar of the Karm Pesach. And vice versa, you have 100 Jews, 10 of them are tamei, they're gonna... Well, no.
What is it?
Well, maybe they can, but they're not here. At the end of the day, they're not here on Erev Pesach. They didn't come.
So
they didn't come.
To bring Karm Pesach with Mazah?
This is what we want to bring it?
Yeah, the people that bring it.
You mean they only count themselves?
Well, yeah, because they're the only ones that want to bring it. And they're touch of the tzibur there.
We don't count them in the cheshbon. Here, look what he says. Imkain din zed demi v'roiv einoi ela betmeim ha'imdim chutz la'azara b'shas shchita. The din of mir and roiv are those who are tamei, who are standing outside of the azara at the time of the shchita. Aval afilu im roiv Yisrael loibo lasis Pesach. Let's say the majority of Klal Yisrael don't even show up. Umiyud asu, and the miyud come. Oisam haroiv shahi v'derech r'chayka. The majority of Klal Yisrael, who let's say 99% of Klal Yisrael got stuck in traffic. 99% of. So we say, oh, ein sibor nidchis, right? We said ein sibor nidchis. No. Oisim hasheni ki lo yineschayvu klal b'Pesach Rishon. They were not chayim in Pesach Rishon. Uve Pesach Sheini neskayvu. What's the halacha if 10 million gerim convert between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheini? They're makar of Pesach Sheini. Why? But
so you have a scenario of Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheini was chiyuv.
Yeah. So you have, let's say like this: you have 100 Jews in the Harabayas, and 10 of them are tamei. So they're going to be pushed off to Pesach Sheini. If you have 100 who are tamei, they're makar right then and there. I.e., they're the minority of Klal Yisrael. No, they're not. They're all of Klal Yisrael. We only count the Jews who are standing there on the Harabayas. Haklal, look what the way he describes it. Haklal ikar din zeh, the miyot v'roiv, gzeres hakasafi, it's a biblical decree, rak bo'oimdim kan v'yichoylem lasis haPesach. Only among those standing here, able to be makar the Karm Pesach. Im kein nira barar, im yivneh habayis b'mher v'yameinu. If the Beis HaMikdash were to be built, Bein shnei apsachim, ayin b'shas Rosh Hashanah gabe oimer de'ivni b'chameisar kivan de'berishon lo Yisrael sham. Since by the Pesach Rishon there were no Jewish people, v'lo hayu mikdash ein chiluk bein roiv l'miyot. There's no difference between Rav and Miyat. You know why? Because nobody was there. Nobody was there. We only count the Jews who are there. And if there were no Jews there, Imkain Kol Yisrael Chayavim Lasais Pesach Sheini Kamai Ben Neskairu Gerim Harbe Ki Dinim Elu the Rav Umiyat Himrak Meha Oimdim Chutz LaAzara are only taking into account those who stand outside the Azara, Kemavur and the Rambam and the Shas, like we said. Aval Be'ein Oimdim, but if they're not standing there, Ve'ein Beis HaMikdash, Ein HaCheshben Hazeh. V'chol Yisrael Yasu Pesach Sheini, Kein Nira Barar. So this Chiddush, by the way, that the Munkatcher said, that Rav Aaron of Bel said, to explain the Nusach of the Haggadah, Al Matzei Sumram Yechluhu, because Rav Shol HaLevi Natanzana asked, the halach is Ein Sibur Nidches. If Ein Sibur Nidches, what are you saying that the Beis HaMikdash is built? We're going to be makar the Karim Pesach. It's not true. The Roiv of Klal Yisrael is not makar the Karim Pesach. So we said there must be a difference between when Roiv is Tameim and when there is no Beis HaMikdash. What's the difference? Minchas Chinuch is explaining the difference. When Roiv are Tameim, so you have 100 Jews standing at the Azara, 10 are Tahar, 90 are Tameh. So we say that Tzibur is not Nidches. But that's only people made outside the Azara are the only ones taken into the Cheshbon. But if there nobody outside the Azara, and Koshkin, if there's no Azara, there's no Gzeres HaKos of Ein Tzibur Nidches. Because there's no Tzibur. Because there's nobody there. There's no Beis HaMikdash to stand outside of. So look what he writes. Va'ani Koisev Zeh, and this Chiddush that I'm saying, that there's a difference between Roiv Tmeim and no Beis HaMikdash. I'm writing this Chiddush, Bein Shnei HaPsachim, between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheini. Yihi Ratzain Sheibane B'mheira Koydem Pesach Sheini. V'nizke V'nasa Pesach Sheini, Amen Ve'amen. And then he writes, after I wrote this Chiddush, I saw in the Yushalmi that it's Taka Machlokes Tanoim. If the Beis HaMikdash will be built between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheini, one man Damar says, Klal Yisrael will be makar of the Pesach Sheini, and one man Damar says, Lo Yakrivu. So it comes out the Machlokes, the Shalom Eshev, and the Minchas Chinuch is really Machlokes Tanoim. So this pshat in the Koirech, maybe Hillel holds one way. Hillel holds that if, but it's very interesting Machlokes. And
that answers the question. So the Rebbe was asking, what's the difference between Beis HaMikdash?
What's the difference? I mean, if there's Gzeres HaKosav that the Tzibur is not Nidches, so then what's the difference whether Roiv Tmeim or whether there's no Beis HaMikdash? So he's saying it makes a difference because the Cheshbon of Roiv in determining what a Tzibur is only when they're standing ready to be makar of the Pesach. But if they're B'derech Rechaika, we don't even take them into account. In other words, let's say you have 100 Jews in the Azara, 10 are Tameh, and you have the rest of Klal Yisrael delayed. So we should say, no, there's no Karban Pesach Sheini because the Ein Sibur Nidches. No, the halacha is we only count the people standing by the Azara, and standing by the Azara was only a miyat, so they will be pushed off the Pesach Sheini. Okay, Rabbi, so just a few brief thoughts. Shkach everyone for coming, and have a great day.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.